It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. So for those of you who have been listening and following us, we have just been completing the last bunch of interviews have been all around women leaders in the law. And we are now transitioning to just some other dynamic women who have really had an impact in women's leadership. And today I want to introduce you to Esther Kuznetz. Esther started in the financial industry back on Wall Street, a former New Yorker, in the 1980s. So we kind of were cutting our teeth in similar time zones. She went on to move to Sarasota, Florida, and where she joined a small independent firm. She was reintroduced to the financial industry and truly found her calling. After 13 years at that firm, she knew it was time to start her own. And as Esther and I have gotten to know each other, we both started our current companies in 2008. And she has been making an impact on women in finance, financial industry, the financial future of so many companies, families, and so forth. But you don't really want to sit and hear me chat about Esther. We want to talk with you. So Esther, thanks for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
So let's talk, let's go back a little bit before we go forward. You were not necessarily the ideal candidate in the financial world back in the early days. How did you end up getting into the whole financial industry?
It was quite by accident. I was on my own at a very young age and I had to make a living and I knew how to type. So, there were two industries where you could make a living as a secretary. And yes, we were called secretaries back then and we were proud of it.
I remember taking the typing test myself.
Oh, yeah. And anyway, one was legal and one was financial. And I happened to get a temp job over at Goldman Sachs way back when. And it was very exciting. And I was there for a year and then went to another firm that's no longer around over at the World Trade Center. And I got a job in mergers and acquisitions in the 80s, and it was just so exciting. And I was making, as a secretary in those years, big money, and I could support myself, and it just went on from there.
So how did the transition go from secretary for you? Because I remember I started in the temp agencies. I remember I was a temp at many a law firm back in the day. Nothing I really talk about today, but thank you for bringing back those memories. But going from that secretarial role to actually not just owning your own firm in a financial way, but really moving into the whole space of managing, learning about the financial piece and helping others there.
So when I moved to Sarasota in 1991, I got a job as a secretary at a law firm, and I was there for a couple of years, and one of my clients had just gone independent in the financial world, and he needed help, and I was pretty much done with what I was doing. And so he asked me to join him in his firm to run the office and make sure everything was going well. He was a good portfolio manager. He was not a good business person. So I went in there and I did what had to be done. And then I got registered. I studied hard. I took the Series 7. I took the 63, the 65, and all the numbers, got registered and started working with clients. And that was in 1996. And the rest is history. I just loved it.
You found your calling. You found really what lights you up.
Absolutely.
So when you went on to build your own firm, what was that like? So many people, and I'm going to call you out in an incredibly positive way. There are so many people who talk about doing things. There's so many people who aspire to do things. There's not that many women, and very calling a spade, our age bracket, that actually went out and started their own financial firms.
Well, and there's not that many women in the financial industry.
Very true.
So it's, it's really, really hard. And honestly, I spent a couple of years between that first independent firm and my firm at a large wirehouse that will remain unnamed. And it was not a good experience at all. So when I got out of there is when I started my own, thinking, this has got to stop. I left the first firm under circumstances where he brought his son in and gave him my job. And then I went into the wirehouse, and there was somebody that came in that basically, when he came in, he got rid of all the female advisors in 3 different branches. And so I had to find my way, and I had to do things my way. And every time I went to one of these other firms and they said, who are you going to focus on? And I said, women. And they said, well, you can't do that. They said, you'll waste your time. They never take risk. You'll be hand-holding all the time. And I didn't see it that way. And that was my passion, was helping women. And because I believe that women are the most underserved group of people in this industry. And the problem with that is women need it the most for many, many reasons. And, to be considered a sector of the population when you're really half the population, I think, is the first problem. We don't consider men in this industry as a sector, but women are considered a sector. So that was how I said, you know what, I knew better. I knew I could do this. And I was not happy working for others and doing things their way. So I made my own firm and took the big jump and held my breath. And, here we are down the road, and it's the best thing I've ever done, not just for me, but also for my clients.
So when you went out and you started building a book of business and saying, I'm taking a stand for women, somebody has to, I'm willing to take the risk. Although the rest of the population is saying women are a little risk averse, right?
Yeah.
Yet I'm willing to take the risk. How did you go on to start building a client base and actually connect with the women that you wanted to serve?
Well, the first thing I did was join, down here, networking is huge. And so I joined.
So many places in the world, networking is huge. It's amazing.
Right. And down here, there's a bunch of women's networking groups that are just women. And I was like, oh, well, here we go. So I joined them, and I would go all the time. And not only was it good for my business, but my best friends that I have now, I've met at these networking groups. And I would speak at each one quarterly and talk about what was going on. And it was all educational. And that's how I started bringing in clients, because the women would come up to me and, you'd hear the story. Well, I go with my husband and he doesn't even look at me, let alone answer my questions. And I never understand what's going on. And they're always talking up here, and all this stuff. And the women would come to me. And what I do is mostly translation, which doesn't sound that difficult, and it's not, and education. And that's one of the main differences that I have found with men and women, and how they do money. The women want to get it. They want to understand what they're doing, how they're investing. And once they understand it, they take tons of risk, and they do it better than the men most of the time. And so, I had back then, market was doing really well. I had my clients 100% in stocks, and the women knew it. And, they could tell you they couldn't tell you exactly what was in their portfolio, but they knew that they were 100% in stocks. They knew what kind of companies they had and what risks they were taking. And I've never had a problem with women taking risk.
So what has surprised you in building this?
I haven't had too many surprises, because I spent so many years ahead of that, studying these markets and studying the ways of people. So I knew that women see money different than men. We communicate different than men. And, I know this isn't a big news flash to you and probably most of the listeners, but it is a big news flash to my industry, which it shouldn't be. And so, I think the most interesting was going to conferences where they would have breakouts about how to sell to women, because the industry is just starting to learn that women actually have money to invest, which I knew all along.
And women are decision makers.
And
there's an enormous amount of women decision makers.
Correct. And it's like almost 90% in some of these, things I've read. Whereas there's only 16% of registered advisors are women. So there's, this big disconnect.
That's a big difference.
Oh, it's huge. So the biggest, the surprise was going into these things and they're like, well, this is how you sell to women. And me being the wallflower that I am would say, well, wait a minute. You never sell to women. Women hate to be sold to. You sell to men and you work with women. And they kind of look at me like I was an alien. Like, what do you mean you work with women? Aren't we selling here? And I'm like, no, I don't sell anything. I talk to my clients. I discuss what's out there and what I think they should do. And they ask questions and I answer. And we figure out, we come together and we build a portfolio. And they really, really didn't get it. As a matter of fact, there was one guy that was running one of these breakouts and he said, well, what you do is you have two different business cards. You have one that you give to all your male clients, and then you have one in pastel colors that you give to your female clients. And with that, I walked out the door and I was like, you got to be kidding me. I was like, okay, we're done here. Because obviously, no.
So, I will tell you, and listeners, those of you who've been following her success for a while, success story for a while, don't hear me very often get stuck for what to say. And the two different business cards, one being pastel, could be one of those moments, Esther. And you're right. I remember back in the day, and I'm going back in the day when I was selling printing. And I was being, quote unquote, the men were saying, oh, you got to take them, it's all about where you're taking them for lunch, and you got to drink, or you got to do this and you got to do that. And I remember going into W Magazine, one of my big clients, and I said, ladies, what, grab a bite or go out after work at some point. And they're like, oh, that would be lovely. And we came up with why don't we go over to Saks and actually see the colors that were coming out for the season, because W is a fashion magazine.
Right.
And they wanted to kind of, and we did a working experience and then grabbed a bite. Right. And they got to actually check in on things that were relevant, introduce me to people that were relevant. We had a lovely meal and it became an entirely different experience. Then, right. and I said, back in my early days, I never showed up with a portfolio. And they're like, people say well, where's your portfolio? I said, that means that I should be showing you stuff that I think you need, but I don't know what you need until I listen and talk to you.
Right.
That's
exactly.
Rude, right? It's rude. It's
exactly
presumptuous.
Right.
And that's so much how women roll in today,
yes.
in the world.
Yeah. We discuss, women share, women refer. I always, no matter where I was the one getting all the referrals, and the men weren't getting as many as I was, and because women share and men don't. Now, these are all general statements, and I'm sure there's men that refer also. But again, when you're talking big numbers, it's mostly the women that are talking and saying, all of that.
So interestingly enough, and I will say literally within 3 minutes of jumping on this call, a friend of mine called me, businesswoman, friend of mine, and asked me something and said, yeah. She goes, can you just do a quick introduction? I know you're busy. You said you had a 1:30, blah, 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 blah. She goes, but when you can, just do that introduction for me, because I'd really love to meet this person.
There you go.
Right. And it was 3 minutes, the quick phone call to, yes, women are incredibly thoughtful. Mm-hmm. And community-based oriented.
Right. And that's why in the women's networking group, we always had where the women would come out and say, kudos to this one who I did this with, or I bought this from this person. And in the networking groups that were mixed, I didn't see that, and you didn't have, like, the sisterhood is so powerful. And you don't see it anywhere else.
Right there, because I think that's one of the most powerful statements is the sisterhood of women is incredibly powerful.
Oh, yeah.
And, all of us to learn to lean into it.
Right. And to uplift each other and not tear each other down. And, when you get to a certain point in business, you see a lot more of everybody lifting each other up and not, the petty things and anything else like that. And
so what's your vision for what's
special.
Next for you? So what's your vision for what's next for you?
Well, I love what I do, and I don't ever want to stop. I mean, I am so involved in my clients and their families and their lives, and I can't even imagine stopping that. Now, I have 2 other advisors in my office that work for me, and an assistant. I'm growing my office. I do a TV segment here in Sarasota a couple times a month on the ABC station. And I may be doing that on other stations. I've been doing the one here for 4 years. I enjoy it. Again, it brings in, it's a show that is focused on women, so that works well. But yeah, just educating women and educating more women as far as financial and what's important and what they need to be working on and looking at and all of that. It's so important to do that.
So any thoughts, tips, advice for other women leaders who are thinking of taking the bold steps that you took early on?
Do it. There is nothing that you can't do if you really focus and push forward on it. I'm somebody in an industry where most people have degrees and all kinds of higher education. I got out of high school a year early because I was already working 4 jobs and had my own apartment. And I basically, I had nothing behind me. And look where I am. And we can do this. And especially if we all work together, just keep your eye on the prize and do what your passion is. And you're going to do great. If I could do it, anyone can.
And I love, don't let the little things, which seem big at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So not discounting those things that look really, really big as those obstacles and those boulders to navigate. They look huge to us at the time.
Right.
Reflect back on them. Don't let those things stop you, is what I'm hearing you say.
Well, and to the opposite, even though it might feel like the end of the world, and believe me, there have been plenty of times that I thought I was done. And I had people that were trying to get me out of the industry and do horrible things. But now in hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened, because had they not happened, I wouldn't be where I am now. And those people that tried to ruin me are now watching me doing all of this stuff, and they know that I'm doing better than they ever thought of doing. And it's just wonderful. And, life is good. Life is really good.
And you hear in your voice how happy you are.
Oh, yeah.
And, I know this is an audio only, listeners, but you could hear it in Esther's voice, her happiness, her fulfillment, her joy of life. And I always have a strong belief of our careers, our businesses are the catalysts that drive us to a fulfilling existence, a fulfilling life, a great purpose and joy, every day. And it's not about work or life. It's the culmination of all of it together to bring great happiness.
Right. And the feeling that never leaves me any second of any minute of any day is that I am so blessed. I am so blessed to have come through everything. I'm so blessed to have what I have. So blessed to be doing what I'm doing and have the relationships I have, both with friends, family, clients who are friends most of the time, and everything else. And just never forget the blessings that you have that are around you and just grow them. They
I
just
love
grow.
Esther, how can our listeners learn more about you?
You can see me on, well, my website is www.starfinancialsolutions.com. And all of my segments are on there. You can email me, you can call me. Again, www.starfinancialsolutions.com. And that's me.
Awesome. Listeners, remember that's in our show notes. I'll always say as I get ready to close the show to take a moment and think about what was your takeaway? What was your aha moment from Esther and I's conversation today? Identify it. Give yourself the gift of writing it down. And then make the decision, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to take that piece of knowledge and implement it for your greater good, greater growth, and greater joy? Thank you for joining us here today at Her Success Story. See you next time as we continue with more wonderful interviews and great insight.
Approval anymore, 'cause I've got mine.